Thank you, Dr. Dhanjal. Thank you very much. I'm delighted and I'm absolutely honored to be here. I will be sharing some of my thoughts based on a paper which was recently published in the American Review of Public Administration with the same title pretty much. And I will share the findings. This was in April. Things have changed, but the basic scenario remains the same. Let me first also say that how delighted and how inspired I am listening to Mr. Kochar, who I have known him for many, many years now. I remember meeting him way back, almost 10 years back in my office and other places. And so it's a great pleasure. And his optimism is really inspiring. And I align myself with that optimism. I agree with most of what he has said. And I, in fact, will take this ball little further. If one had to ask anybody, what is the problem in India? The problem would be implementation. We don't have a problem of ideas. In fact, I have been on record writing to the cabinet secretary saying we should have a moratorium on new ideas for 2 years because we have not implemented previous ideas, as Mr. Kochar just said, that we have set up administrative reform commissions. We just had, huge amount of money of a poor democracy was spent on administrative reform commission. And people agreed. It was gazetted. There were a group of ministers who agreed on the implementation, yet they have not been implemented. So it's not about setting up another commission on administrative reform. We've had enough commissions. There are a huge number of reports. It is implementation, implementation, implementation. The competitive and comparative advantage of our country will be determined only by our ability to implement ideas, not by generating ideas. We have great people. They won Nobel Prize. We have people everywhere, the same people working in the World Bank to you name it, they are there. So it's not about ideas anymore. We have the ideas. It's implementation. And that's why I'm delighted to report to you what I found. And this has been a topic close to my heart. So it's not that I sort of just suddenly woke up for COVID, but when I looked at it, I found there were 9 similarities. In fact, they could be called the 9 habits of an effective government. And this across, in my long years, I worked in 50 countries, not traveled, but worked, advising, working. And I find great amount of similarity where things work and where things don't work. And I would like to share those 9 similarities where things work. And these are also the instruments for transforming any government. And that's why, if you pardon me, I'm going to use a PowerPoint just simply because it'll be easier for you to follow and perhaps for me to speak. So allow me to share my screen with your permission. And I have the screen. I hope everyone can see. Mr. Kochar, you can see the screen?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful, wonderful. So these are the 9 habits of an effective government. I call them 9 lessons for effective public management. Let me start by saying that in April, there was no doubt that all agencies had come to the conclusion, including the World Health Organization, that India had done a great job. Among the large countries, and even today, if you look at the per capita death rate, we are doing very well. Infection has gone up, but in this business, the real thing is making sure not too many people die. I mean, infection is a means towards an end. The end is to prevent fatalities from coronavirus. And we per capita in a large democratic country, which is a developing country, we are doing by any standards compared to US, Europe, etc. We are doing well. So there is no doubt. It's not my personal opinion. It's the World Health Organization's opinion. And I'll be happy to share that. Now, why did that happen? Why did the experts say, not me, the experts? And that's why I got thinking. I said, well, how come this has been such a great success? Or at least everybody from New York Times to WHO was saying, well, India has done very well. Our initial response, lockdown, decisiveness, firmness, the way we moved. And perhaps we are reaping benefits now. Of course, given the virus, you can't have perfection. It will spread, but the counterfactual could have been much worse. And that's what we have to look at, the glass half full, not the one which may be empty still. So the first thing, why things work in this, and this is really for all government agencies. I'm not just making a point about COVID in a narrow sense of the word. I would like this, if we learn these lessons, to be translated to other areas of public sector management. The first is clarity of goals and objective. In this case, the goal was very clear. We had to prevent the spread of infection and reduce fatalities. There was no ambiguity about it. So the clarity of goal is the starting point in public management. What happens, the bane of public management or the government management is most of the time you don't know what you're supposed to do. There are multiple principals who have multiple objectives which are often conflicting. You know, Ministry of Finance is asking something, the Niti Aayog is asking something, someone is asking. So therefore, clarity of goals and objectives really in this case was a very big factor why we were able to focus our attention and get things done. So I think that is a lesson we need to learn, that if we have to get any job done, whether in public or private sector, but especially in public sector, because we have multiple principles. Everybody thinks they have a right to supervise the government, whether it's the CAG or it's the Standing Committee of the Parliament or it's the media. It's even more important to have clarity of goals, so everybody comes on the same platform. So I think that was a very big factor. We must learn a lesson that we must have clarity of goals if we have to achieve. It shouldn't be that you talk to 5 people and they tell you 5 different versions of what you're supposed to do. So clarity of goals is a starting point. And in this case, we had very clear goals, what we need to do as a country, and therefore we have succeeded as a country, or we are succeeding as a country. Then the other thing is you may have clarity of goals, but you may not know how to measure them. You may say, you know, unemployment, but they may not be, either you may not be able to measure or you don't know what's going on. But what gets measured gets done. You must be able to measure. In this case, that also fortunately was very easy. You can see in your Arogya Setu app to WHO website and many other websites that everybody knows that what the death rate is, what the infection rate is. So everything is being measured on a almost 4 times a day basis. And you have, so everyone knows what to measure and how to measure, and it's being measured. So not only the goals were clear, but also they were being measured. And I think that contributed to clarity and also motivation in getting things done. So that's the second lesson. If you have to get something done, what gets measured gets done. If you can't measure, you may have lofty goals, but if you can't measure, you will never know whether you're moving towards them or away from them. So it's very important that we do this. Again, you may have goals and you may be measuring, but people don't know how you come up. You know, a lot of governments come up and say, we have done such an excellent job. And the opposition says, no, 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 you have not done, you know, this job is lousy. And the people get confused. So transparency of data, that how was it measured and what are your operations is terribly important. In this case, there was total transparency because World Health Organization and other agencies, it was an international issue. The data was completely transparent. It was being maintained transparently. It was being shared transparently. And therefore, it really mattered and it made a difference. Nobody really questions the data. I have not seen anybody questioning the data. There are, of course, as Dr. Dhanjal said, there will always be fringe people who will question anything yet you do, but we leave those 10% out. But I'm talking in general. People trust that data. They may not like it. They may say that this is not good, but they trust. There's no major distrust of the data because deaths can't be hidden in a democratic country. They could be in some other countries which are not democratic, but in democracy, the last thing that you can do is hide a death because everybody gets to know. So I think it's very important. We had transparent data which contributed to this, and it will contribute. Then accountability. In this case, there was no fudging. People were accountable. There were people who were assigned and you knew who was in charge. You knew the names of the people who were in charge. Even if it was chief minister or the head of any task force, everybody knew who was accountable, who was supposed to be doing. And therefore that mattered. In many situations, you don't know. You know, you may have goals, you may know what to do, but you don't know really. They say, well, you know, the malaria eradication did not work, but malaria eradication is not a person. It's a program. Who was in charge of that? If it didn't work, did anybody catch the person's neck? And in this case, that was the case. And therefore, I believe for effective management, you must assign explicit and unambiguous accountability for delivery. Again, one of the things that we have learned is the accountability for results trickles down, right from the Prime Minister who made himself accountable. He took the blame for everything. He said, I am leading the charge. And therefore, the accountability trickled down from him to the chief ministers, to chief secretary, down the line. But it cannot trickle up. If you just delegate the accountability to someone at the district level, it will not trickle up to the level of the minister or chief minister or even the prime minister. So accountability always trickles down. So if you have to get great things done, the top must be feeling accountable. They must convey that they are accountable. They're listening and they are acting. And I think in this case, we had that, and therefore the stars were aligned in a good way for us as a country. The sixth was there must be incentives to perform. Very important. You know, you may have all the other things, but human beings are driven by incentives. If there are no consequences for good or bad delivery or performance or action, then people say, well, it doesn't matter. You know, they just talk, but it really doesn't. But in this case, I can name people who lost jobs. There were people who were transferred. People were, there were incentives and disincentives more than incentives to perform. People knew there will be consequences if you did not deliver. And there were consequences of people who slipped. So I think that was an important lesson, that you can't have lofty ideals and assume that everyone is so well-intentioned that things will happen, whether, there are exceptions. Mother Teresa and Mahatma Gandhi are exceptions. We can't expect everyone to be like that. You have to have consequences for delivery, or non-delivery of what is expected from a national perspective. So I would classify that as a lesson number 6, which is very important when we are designing public systems. We must not ignore and just say, and I say this having sat in committee of secretaries where some people would argue, because from 1987, the 4th Pay Commission, the 5th Pay Commission, the 6th Pay Commission, and the 7th Pay Commission, trust me, it was my business to read. I was paid to read these reports, and I was in fact hired to implement them. All have said that we must have a performance-related incentive scheme in government. They said, we have increased your salary so much, now it must be matched by performance-related incentive. It has not been implemented. So when I say this, it's not just an empty talk. This is the need of the hour. There must be incentive, consequences. Otherwise, we will not, as a nation, make progress. We can't depend on people's goodwill. This is not, nation building is not a matter of just goodwill and karat, that you're doing someone a favor. It's a duty. Importance of communication. I have been part of governments where, we can't be terribly proud of communication, because communication is very important. You can have an excellent policy, but if you're not able to communicate in a manner that it resonates with people and you take them along, and if you can communicate, trust me, half your job is done. You don't even have to do it, because people will do it. As Mr. Kocher and Dr. Dhanjal have just pointed out, that they have discovered that the action is happening, and it's happening because they were communicated from the heart. People knew what is expected, and they rise up to the occasion. But they need to be told, taken into confidence, and communicated the importance. So the importance of communication in public policy implementation is beyond doubt, and we don't pay much attention. We think, well, it's a good policy and it will be done, as if you can assume. People will figure it out that it's such a great policy. No, all policies have to be marketed like any other good idea. And when you market those ideas and you make the people buy into it, then half your job is done, because people will then, because it's in their interest to implement it also. It's not that it's just in the interest of one group of people in the government. The entire nation wants to implement. These are public policies. These are not private policies. And therefore one must, I could go on this, and each one of them is a matter of at least a paper or a book. And on each one of them, I have worked for a long time. And so therefore, when I come to these conclusions, it's not just looking at one crisis, it's across that these are important lessons for effective public management. 8, whole of government approach. Many times we take these narrow silo-oriented approach. We say this, everyone knows, and I hate to say it because it looks so obvious and so repetitive that we work in silos. Whereas, in government, everything we do is a team sport. And there are excellent examples of teamwork, and I can quote, but this is not the place, nor do I have the time to do it. But many of these, in fact, I would say most of the problems that we have in our country, the ones which matter, require a whole of government approach. In fact, it requires a whole of society approach, beyond the government also. But at the very minimum, whole of government approach, because if the whole of government is not involved, the whole of society has no chance of being involved. So you start with whole of government must be on the same page, and there are ways of doing it. Happy to answer any questions on any one of them, that how can this be done? Each one of them is doable and has been done. It's not a theoretical proposition that I make here. Finally, there is no doubt that you can't implement these things if you do not take a systems approach. A lot of time people say in government that people come and talk, when I was in the government, I did this, I did that. And people ask, so what happened, sir, when you left? Well, it just went down the tube. And so what happened? Because we don't take a systems approach. It's a very personalized approach, and we must be very careful. And in this case, we not only had the whole of government approach, but we have a systematic approach. We had standard operating procedures. We knew which agency is looking after what. So we took a systems approach, and that's why it's sustainable. That's why it is still working. And that's why one person doesn't have to stay up the whole night worrying, because it's the system. Because from Peter Drucker onwards, all management gurus have told us, we keep forgetting, it's nothing new, that 80% of the outcomes of any policy initiative are dependent on system, only 20 on people. I hate to say this when 400 or 500 people are watching this, but frankly, it's the system that really delivers. People play only 20% of the role. And within that 20%, 80% is leadership. And in fact, it is the job of the leaders to create systems and nurture them. And therefore, I cannot overemphasize how important it is in all our lives, but particularly in public sector, to take a systems approach so that a person may come and go, but the system continues to deliver. And that is really what we should aspire. And that's what we have seen, that when in the case of COVID, you took a systems approach, we delivered. So all these 9 conditions were fulfilled, and that's why the rest of the world thinks India has done a great job, considering that we are such a large democracy. I mean, let me emphasize, a large democracy. It could be a different ballgame in any other system of governance. We are talking about democracy, and that's a different kettle of fish than some of the other systems that exist. So in a democracy, to be able to do this in a way that people will be voting, not just on Zoom and doing the polling, but there'll be a real vote which will count. And so you have to do things in a systematic and a proper way. So with that, I will stop, because I know there are a lot of things to be done. So thank you very much for your patience and for listening to this. Thank you.